Hello, everybody. This is Rami and I'm talking to you from Amman. I'm sorry I'm not able to be with you today in Ramallah, so we had to record this, so it's not live, but I hope it's worthwhile still. I was asked to participate in this workshop entitled Designing Civic Encounter, and the title of my presentation is Public Space and Sphere in the Midst of Neoliberal Threats and Urban Transformations. And before I start presenting to you my PowerPoint, which I've prepared for the event, I would like to talk to you for 5 minutes just about this neoliberal moment that we are part of today. I will not bore you with a lot of historic details of how it started and everything, but more or less, I just want you to focus first on this late capitalist moment after the second half of the 20th century, when there was a lot of flow of capital from one place to the other and the shift to the service sector in different parts of the world. And the role and involvement of the state started to shift dramatically since the 70s and 80s, since the times of Thatcher and Reagan, specifically Thatcher, where the state, which was mainly a provider of health services, schooling, sometimes involved in social housing and so on, is gradually pulling away from its responsibilities and instead is entering as an investor with multinational corporations, with major companies into various projects. Of course, this neoliberal moment is different in different parts of the world. There are certain places where there is a very high level of accountability, such as the UK, Germany, Scandinavia, and other parts of the world. And again, there are places with less accountability and less transparency, like, for example, our part of the world. So, and especially that, in terms of the South is concerned, which is our part of the world, this neoliberal moment was transformed in excessive privatization of, for example, power sector, telecommunication, water, you name it, everything was privatized. But also was expressed in the change in the nature of aid, foreign aid, from first world countries to our part of the world. So instead, in the 60s and 70s, the aid supporting major projects on the ground that really made a difference, such as, for example, Aswan in Egypt, or Qanat al-Ghor al-Sharqiyya, the Eastern Canal Ghor in Jordan, and so on, which actually made tremendous impacts on the industry, on the well-being of individuals in these countries, and so on. Aid is now supporting policies to give an excuse for donor agencies to interfere and sit with your ministerial cabinet to interfere in policies that are made to push for more privatization, and so on and so on. I want to concentrate today, because if we want to talk about neoliberalism, there are many venues where we can actually talk about, but I want to concentrate on the effect of neoliberalism on the city, and especially during the past 15 years, where the Arab world had witnessed major shifts in urban transformations. And again, before I go to the slides, I would just like to explain, just to create some sort of a comparison. We're comparing today's neoliberal age with a time in the 70s and 60s. And I'll just create some sort of maybe interesting comparisons to start my presentation with. A time in the 60s and 70s where Cairo and Beirut were the models for the rest of Arab world in terms of urban model and urban change. Today it's Dubai. A time where basically, for example, the state, through its different agencies like housing and urban development, supported social housing, not necessarily for the poor, but social housing for the middle class. Social housing for example, I'll just give examples from Amman. إسكان الأطباء، إسكان المهندسين، إسكان المعلمين، إسكان عالية, people who work in Jordanian and so on. As opposed to today, where we have gated communities for the extremely upper middle class, very secluded compounds of gated communities that are extremely expensive. We compare the 70s and 60s, where municipalities ran cities and really managed them, where today we are having new emerging bodies that were created out of nowhere. Solidaire in Beirut, which is a company, Mawarid in Amman, Asiza in Aqaba, and so on. These bodies are actually managing our cities and dictating how urban change is going to take place. One can give a lot of comparisons to this neoliberal moment, and I want to stop with my introduction here and move to my PowerPoint. I hope it will work out, because we're recording this in Amman. The PowerPoint is being taken to Ramallah, and hopefully the mismatch will happen, basically. So I am very much concerned about the nature of public space and how it is shifting today in this moment of neoliberalism that we are part of. Especially in the Arab world, where there is a lack of state initiatives that addresses public spaces. So if the first oil boom of the 1960s and 70s, I have mostly images, there are only a couple of slides that I will read from screen. If the first oil boom of the 60s and 70s in the Gulf facilitated the flow of petro-dollars to banks in places like Beirut and Amman, contributing, and in the case of Amman, for example, to a more divided city along socio-economic lines of division, more recently, and towards the 1990s, and with the flow of new wave of surplus capital from the Gulf, urban dwellers of the city have been noticing the proliferation of a new visual urban landscape, manifested in numerous, humongous billboards promoting exclusive urban environments in the form of gated communities and high-end business towers in different places of the city, leading to more divisions not only between East and West Amman, but within different parts of Western Amman as well. A stretch of billboards about the Abdali investment project is the only source of information between the community at large and this, for example, major neoliberal urban restructuring project in the city. It is interesting to understand the effect of the circulation of global capital, which is primarily surplus capital from oil revenues, where, after September 11th, this surplus capital was no longer welcome to countries in the West and the US. So it found its place in cities like Amman, in Beirut, in Tunis, in Cairo, in Maghreb, in Rabat, and even eastward in Karachi, in Lahore, in Pompeii, in Istanbul, in different parts of the world. So it's interesting to understand the effect of the circulation of global capital, which is the surplus oil revenues, and huge reserves of money in search for highly yielding and secure investments, excessive privatization and circulating urban flagship projects in Jordan, Lebanon, Egypt, and all over the Gulf states, and throughout the Arab region on the transforming of urban reality, property values, and speculation, and nature of public life in these cities. It has been estimated that over the period of, for example, 2005 to 2020, the Arabian Gulf states are likely to have approximately $3,000 billion or so spent on investment within the Middle East and North Africa. New emerging urban islands of excessive consumption for the chosen elite, together with the internationalization of commercial real estate companies and construction consultancies capable of providing high-quality services, signify this neoliberal urban restructuring in places such as downtown Beirut, Abdali in Amman, Dreamland in Cairo, financial district in Manama, the development of Abu Ghraib River in Rabat. I have to stop here because this is a very interesting story. I was just in Rabat recently in the year 2009, just in December, so almost a year and a half ago. And Rabat is a small town in the Maghreb, and on the way from the airport to the city, it's like deja vu, I saw all of these billboards that I have seen in Beirut and I've seen in Amman. And it's like deja vu. The same investors, without mentioning names, the same transnational capitalist class, the same images. And I've asked, and they said, this is the Abu Ghraib River. And I was surprised, you know. Eventually, I inquired, and again, this project, this very big neoliberal project, is going to cause major displacement of the local community to the outskirts of the city, and it's going to create very exclusive, very expensive urban environments for the upper middle class. So it's even happening in Rabat, all the way to the west. Pearl Island reclamation project in Doha, and even in the heart of the holy city of Mecca through the Jabal Umar project. Cities are obliged to create the right milieu, competitive business climate, and first-class tourism attractions in order to lure people to come live, invest, and entertain. And I'm sure in Ramallah, the same thing is happening. Unfortunately, I haven't been there in order to judge and to tell, but from what I've seen in pictures, I think they're getting part of this neoliberal urban restructuring as well. Development in Dubai and the current urban reconstruction for the Beirut downtown, known as the Solidaire project, are becoming the models to follow in such developments, specifically in Amman. One of my friends, Khalid Adham, had noted that circulating images of such neoliberal urban restructuring mimic developments in the West and represent as such an Oriental vision of the Occident. So if we look at, this is, for example, in Wadi Saqra in Amman, what you see on screen, and it is the billboards for one of the projects, which is, it's called The Wall, basically. And with the financial crisis, what we're left with is basically the cranes and the craters in the ground, and these projects are not being implemented. The only thing that explains about these projects to the public are these very silly and stupid billboards, and excuse my language, because they are silly and stupid. This is another billboard for another project by Limitless, and it's promoting this new environment. Of course, you know, you walk and you drive through the city and you are bombarded with all of these billboards that promises a new lifestyle that will change you as an individual altogether, which is all, which is all extremely unrealistic, and it just promises, basically. Let alone the aesthetics and the exclusiveness of such urbanity, which a lot of us actually refuse. These used to be around the Abdali project, and the graphics actually get on my nerves, and they make me extremely upset. لنسكن المحبة. It's like we've never felt love before in the city. Or لنبدأ متعة التسوق. You know, they push you to become more and more a consumer society, and this time it's property that is the consumer good par excellence. I want to talk now about the discourses of neoliberalism in the city and the privatization of city planning and the quartering of urban space. And I want to concentrate on Amman, and I'll give you the example of the Abdali project. It's this island that has been created in the middle of the city. A lot of critiques, a lot of friends have wished for this to be, for example, Central of Amman, you know, a big public space, a big garden, a long breathing space, which we lack in the city. But instead, it's being given to the investor at a very prime rate. I mean, sold to the investor for a very lucrative amount of money, not very expensive. The investor basically is being exempt from paying taxes for the next 20 years. A lot of subsidies that are being given to the investor. So instead of the state subsidizing health, education, agriculture, the state is indirectly subsidizing real estate development, and for the upper middle classes. So the Abdali project and the Solidaire phenomena, what I call conspicuous state subsidies and the privatization of planning in Amman. The financial contribution of the state in these projects is considerable. For example, prime urban land made available for investment forms a greater part of the subsidy, but other forms of the subsidy also include taxes exemption, infrastructure provision, and elimination of all barriers and red tape, in addition to to special building regulations made possible for this particular development. So it's only in this development you are allowed to, create all of these high buildings. That's a form of subsidy. And then, of course, the state creates a new entity, Mawarid. That's before they closed it down, actually, most recently. And this new entity becomes responsible for major decisions that take place in the city. If that's not privatization of planning, then what is? Planning addressed public good, and public good was addressed by municipalities, which is not a private entity, basically. There's a major difference between Mawarid and Assiza and Solidaire running cities and between municipalities running cities, regardless of the bureaucracy, regardless of the lack of knowledge and all the bad connotations that are associated with Arab municipalities. But still, they're not private entities. Of course, when these new bodies were created, they were given the, the characteristics of being very hip, being very avant-garde, and being up to date. Yes, everything was, they had the money to be up to date and to hire the best people. But what went behind the scenes, the whole rhetoric of this neoliberal development is extremely scary. Just have a sip of water. Amman's Abdali, modeled after Solidaire, in fact enjoys some of the same investors as, of course, as Beirut, and is promoted by Mawarid's brochures, websites, short videos, very professionally done, and other promotional material as the new downtown for Amman. New introduced functions include, the American University of Amman, which was cancelled at a later stage into the development, an IT park, different high-end, mainly offices, but also very high-end residential space, in addition to a newly created civic secular plaza, bounded by the state mosque, the parliament, and the law courts. This represents a symbolic replacement of the existing historic downtown and current civic urban symbols of the city, the historic Husseini Mosque, and the specialty markets of the city. This will intensify the socio-economic and spatial polarization, not only between East and West Amman, but also between this new elite urban island and the rest of the city. The Abdali project will culminate in the displacement, and it's already has displaced the nearby existing Abdali transportation hub and terminal, together with its drivers, informal vendors, and occupants to the outskirts of the city, away from the center in Tabarbour now. This project will also definitely present fierce competition to the existing downtown, which is gradually disintegrating and is already suffering from a lack of economic vitality. This is reinforced through a combination of physical, social, and cultural boundary formation processes. This is an image of the Abdali projects once it's finished, and you can see how it's really an island in the city. One of the major characteristics of neoliberal projects is them pushing away the undesired, quote unquote, the poor to the outskirts of the city. This is a caricature which I adore by Imad Hajjaj. He's a very famous Jordanian writer. And he's saying, it's like, Oliver Twist, the pimp, and he has his boys who go and beg in different parts of the city. And he's telling them, don't worry, you'll have a lot of new places for you to beg in. اللي جاي أحلى صدقوني مشروع السرايا ومشروع وسط عمان الجديد ومشروع بوابات الأردن, which is another gated tower. يعني ما تخافوا على مستقبلكم في مليون محل جديد تشحدوا فيه. Which is very interesting because it shows you how the poor of the city are relating to these neoliberal projects. Of course, not as residents and not as users. I remember one of the major financiers of the project, of the Abdali, said in a public interview that, once they will come to Abdali and discover that a cup of coffee might cost 5 JDs or 10 JDs, they will never come back. Of course, we all know who is meant by they. I will talk a little bit about neoliberal management and how power mechanisms shift within the city. Who is managing the city? Who was managing the city? And who is managing the city today? And I talked about that a little bit. The picture on screen is taken from my house between the third and the fourth circle, overlooking the Abdali project. And I call it minarets of neoliberalism because you see all of these cranes in the sky, which is really a symbol of neoliberalism. This is another very interesting advertisement. It was in the newspapers, Al-Ra'i and in the Discours, full-fledged page for one of the gated communities along the airport highway, which is Andalusia, and it's bragging that it had reserved two water wells for this gated community and for its swimming pools. In a country which is the poorest, if not one of the poorest, if not the poorest, in water. Again, these are the types of gated communities that we are promoting. Now I would like to talk about Amman's emerging spaces of inclusion and exclusion. Because it's not just the Abdali, it's not just the gated communities along the airport highway. A lot of other spaces are emerging in the city as spaces of inclusion and exclusion, which is part of this neoliberal moment that we are part of. This is the Abdali Transportation Hub before it was relocated. This is really ironic, you know. When I go to Europe, one of the nicest things I enjoy personally, because I love transportation, is the transportation hubs, whether it is train stations, airports, bus terminals, and what have you. And they become important hubs and arrival points to the city. Why do we push them away to the outskirts of the city? I have no, of course, I know, but I just can't, you know, imagine why. And why don't we take good care of these transportation hubs is also another issue, because they could be important urban centers within the city. This, unfortunately, has been relocated all the way to the outskirts of the city to Tabarbur, causing major difficulty for the average citizen who uses this place. Another of the places of exclusion are the various shopping malls. Because shopping malls are not real places. They are secured by police and by sometimes private security individuals. And the young Ammani male is always filtered at the entrance. And the young Ammani male, you don't see that in Beirut, and I lived in Beirut for a while when I was teaching at AUB. You don't see that in Damascus. I go to Damascus quite often. You only see it in Amman. How there is filtering of people at shopping malls. This is, for example, one of the shopping malls I hate in Amman, Mecca Mall. I hate all shopping malls all over the world, but and I was very sad that they came to my city. If you haven't built that many shopping malls in Ramallah or elsewhere in the West Bank or in Palestine, please be careful. Don't. Maybe it's too late. I don't know. Another of these places of exclusion that are emerging in the city, and if you really concentrate on this image, this is Fifth Circle and the two hotels, Sheraton and the Four Seasons. They literally turn their back to the city. Literally. Not like other five-star hotels that we witnessed in the 50s and 60s, like the Intercontinental, which was part of the city before the recent redecoration, of course. But if you look at these hotels, they are literally turning their back into the city with excessive security measures before entering. This is another form of exclusion. And this is before the bombing, by the way. You know, these existed before the bombing. So it's not that the bombing is to be blamed for this extra measure or for actually not caring about urban spaces in the city to the extent where, as a major institution, which is, for example, either the Sheraton or the Four Seasons, you have the lack of decency to simply turn your back to the city. And you create these very negative urban spaces. So, as I have said, these spaces of inclusion and exclusion are not restricted to shopping malls or to gated communities or to high-end towers, but there are many other places in the city that are emerging as spaces of exclusion. I move now to what I call the new city landlords, or the transnational capitalists class and neoliberal urban management. Who are these individuals, you know, that are managing our cities and making major decisions on behalf of our citizens and behalf of our municipalities? In order to understand the interplay and politics of these emerging models of urban governance, one should focus more on the human agent behind global capital flow orchestrated by the city's new landlords, what's called in the literature the transnational capitalist class, represented through major shareholders of real estate companies, general managers, directors, corporate executives, and globalizing bureaucrats. They tend to play a crucial and significant role in the politics and dynamics of these investments, and also in the direction of capital flow within the region, let alone the promoted lifestyles prevailing within these projects. I've looked into the discourses of these transnational capitalist class, and I analyzed this neoliberal discourse when it relates to real estate development in the city of Amman. And as you can see on screen, I've divided it into two parts. The first part, what I call selling of paradise on the ground. And I'm talking about the various gated communities, whether it was, for example, Andalusia, Greenland, Humar Hills, or Royal Village. And I analyzed the discourse in terms of the name of the real estate company, origin of circulating capital and transnational capitalist class, which is mostly from the Gulf, location within Amman. In terms of gated communities, it is along the airport highway, but also mostly in Western Amman. Project type, life, and architectural style. And this is something very important. We are talking about, for example, from 800 to 1,200 JDs per meter square. This is extremely expensive. So approximately a villa of 200 meters square times 1,000 will be worth almost 200,000 JDs. That's ridiculous in terms of amount of money for a simple villa, which is, you know, promising the American lifestyle, but at the same time dressed in paraphernalia of, for example, local aesthetics of the wood and the mashrabiyya and the arch and the alf lele ulele aesthetics, basically. Very high security and security measures. And what kills me the most are the advertising slogans, basically. For example, for Andalusia, the grass is cleaner, is greener at Andalusia. For Greenland, the joy of living. And I analyze them in terms of all of these, you know, dimensions. For Humar Hills, for example, provide distinctive homes that will redefine everyday life. You know, if it wasn't for these neoliberal projects, our lives wouldn't have been defined. You know, this is really ridiculous. For Royal Village, the joy of living in the city. You're not really part of the city. You are in a gated community. You think you are part of the city, but you are not. And I also analyzed the discourse of this transnational capitalist class, as you can see on screen, what I call living above the city in the clouds, which is basically the major towers that you can see mushrooming all over the city of Amman. Without going into details, because I analyzed them along the same categories: origin of the circulating capital, project type and style, and name of project and marketing slogans. This is for example, Abdali Regeneration Project, a new downtown for Amman. For another project, Amar, on the 6th circle, which you can see on screen, a comprehensive security system. That's how they're promoting their enterprises. Share the vision, embrace the future. There's one actually that kills me. Enjoy the urban and prestigious lifestyle in Amman, you know. Anyways. Lofty views. Yes, they are lofty views because you are given the privilege to live in these towers where you are just overlooking the city, but you're not really part of it because you are extremely content in this tower through the security measures, all the facilities that are provided. You don't even have to go on the streets anymore. So that's what I call the living above the city in the clouds. What you see on screen is an individual. He represents an example of the transnational capitalist class. This is Baha al-Hariri. a major financier for the Abdali project and also for Solidaire, because, you know, the Hariri family owes major shares in Solidaire as a company, basically. The same as when Abdali investment project was created as a company. But Abdali investment project is 50% Mawarid, 50% Saudi OJ. So, you know, it's really blurred the boundary between private and public. Later on, some of the shares were sold to a Kuwaiti investor. But the main point I'm trying to make is that these companies that are created, even though they could have the most beautiful name ever, it is very difficult to decide whether they are really private or public. The same with Solidaire. These are some of the billboards around the Abdali project, which I've talked about earlier. Next, I want to talk about the subaltern citizen and the emerging neoliberal city, basically. Another caricature by Imad Hajjaj, one of my favorites. And this one is entitled Shiqqa Fuq Sutuh. I wish you could see it. It's on screen here. And hopefully you'll be seeing it in Ramallah. In English, he calls this living well, because on one hand, he is really making fun of the new wave of magazines that emerged in Amman recently. One of them is Living Well. And, you know, this magazine has changed focus in the last couple of months. But before, when it first started, all what it did is promoting the lifestyle of the rich, you know, through their parties and different events. So he's making fun of that. And, you know, it's like waste of paper, waste of ink. But at the same time, he's making fun of the billboards, because this is a very poor family that lives in a shiqqa fuq sutuh, basically, and their home is made of the various billboards. You know, the billboard is just material. So he took these billboards and created his house. It's, you know, it's the paradox in how we live, basically. In concluding, for my first part, but then I move to my second part, but it's much shorter, I call it Cranes and Craters in the Urban Landscape, the Financial Crisis and the Urban Condition Beyond Neoliberalism. Again, my favorite shot of Abdali with all the cranes and the craters that have been created in the ground. And there are so many of them in Amman, in Abdali, in Wadi Sa'ra, in Abdoun, in different places of the city. That's the legacy of neoliberalism once everything failed, because there's no accountability, there's lack of financial flow, capital flow, just right at this moment. So everything is just being left to rot and deteriorate, and creating major environmental problems, let alone the socio-cultural and other economic problems. In 1984, the famous Jordanian novelist Abdurrahman Munif published one of his most inspiring novels, Mudun al-Milh, Cities of Salt. I hope you've read it or you're familiar with it. It's actually 5 volumes. He has long novels, but the novel is set in an unnamed Arabian Gulf country in the 1930s, Saudi Arabia, and attempts to describe the transformations that affected this desert Bedouin community when oil is discovered by foreign Americans who end up directly and indirectly colonizing the country, and the radical impact of that discovery on the physical and human landscape. The epic unfolds over a large span of years. It's actually in 5 volumes, and sketches in details the rise of this fake urban civilization, and especially with the abundance of surplus capital from the oil revenues, which is mostly spent on real estate development and lavish banquets. This novel is actually banned in several Middle Eastern countries, including Saudi Arabia. The novel ends in its 5th volume, which is called Badiyat al-Dhulmat, by a detailed description of the fall and demise of this petrodollar American colony culture. And the author skillfully depicts, and that was in 1984, and even before actually, and especially in the 5th volume of the novel entitled Badiyat al-Dhulmat, Desert of Darkness, the destruction and downfall of this oil-based economy and civilization. This is a cover for the novel, or at least for the 5th volume. The significance of this novel, as far as I am concerned, is not only in its sketching the details of the transformation of this desert-bound Bedouin community when confronted with the discovery of oil and its impacts on the physical landscapes and sociocultural and human conditions, but also its prediction as early as the mid-1980s of the fragility and unaccountability of this oil-based economy and its related neoliberal real estate boom that had circulated to other places in the Middle East, such as Amman, Beirut, Cairo, to mention a few. The most recent financial crisis of 2009-2010 in cities like Dubai and in other places in the Middle East testified to the vulnerability and unreliability of such an economy, with the seizing of many real estate projects, termination of hundreds of thousands of jobs, and the lack of socio-economic stability. This is another caricature by Hajjaj, which I will leave for you to read by yourself, but it's entitled بلد في موقع مميز للبيع. In different parts of the Arab world, there is a need of more genuine research that goes beyond the classical analyses of the traditional Arab city into instead researching current urban transformations, flow of global capital, and its effect on the realities of cities, urban structures, and polity. Metropolization processes from below, addressing issues of migration, slums formation, and the details of social life vis-a-vis lines of inclusion and exclusion. Our relationship with the city has always been and will always be a contestation between social classes, different groups, and mechanisms of inclusion and exclusion. More recently, this relationship is becoming ephemeral and superficial, and our sense of belonging to place is very transient in nature. We think that we live in the city as our grave for urbanity increases, but rather we live above the city in gated realities. I want to end by saying that our cities change in different ways, and it's actually a mechanisms of, the result is a mechanism of different attitudes and vision on the city. So yes, there are the major investors who are destroying our cities, but again, there are other changes, what I call counter trends and alternative visions. But again, I always call for the public. Where are the publics and publics in plural that will actually create this counter vision and make it more and more popular? As an urban designer, as an architect, as an urban activist, I thrive to direct my efforts as an urban designer to actually not only grant voice to the urban and social narratives of my city, Amman, but also to attempt to contribute to the creation of public spaces within the city that are more inclusive in nature, thus contributing to the formation of a more critical public sphere within society. I want to end my presentation by offering to you also how the city is changing in a different way. Maybe a more positive way, it's not for me to judge, but at least it's a different urban vision. By offering and presenting different projects on the city, many of them I was involved in, and I was the designer for through my company, Turath, Architecture and Urban Design Consultants, but others that were done by either the state or by the private sector. One of these projects is what you can see on screen, Rainbow Street Urban Regeneration Project, which took 2 years of my life in design. And I'm happy about this project because I think it's a public space that brings people from different backgrounds together. Of course, it has its problems. Maybe it created more congestion in the area and so on. But once we start having more of these public spaces, maybe the congestion will decrease a little bit. But at least you can see in this new huge panoramic lookout that it's a successful space that brings people together to enjoy public life and to enjoy the life in the city. Instead of either being secluded to your homes or to spending time in the shopping malls, hence creating a more consumer-oriented society, or by other segments of the society who stay in their country clubs or in their vacations outside. So at least Rainbow Street brought together people of Amman from different parts of the city. The project stretched from the first circle to Shara Khirfan, and it included the creation of different public spaces and widening of public streets. Another project which I personally like a lot in the city of Amman is Darat al-Funun. For me, this project is very successful as an urban space, because again, it is inclusive. It is inclusive physically in the way it is set up on the stairs. You have multiple entrances from different parts of the project, but also spiritually because it's open for everybody to come and learn and look and experience and so on. Another project is Masrah al-Balad, which is an adaptive reuse of a derelict building into a cultural hub that actually presents and introduces different cultural activities to the city. Another project, which I was personally involved in through my company, is Wakalat Street. Again, it's introducing this notion of pedestrianization to the city in an area that is extremely commercialized, basically. Unfortunately, a lot of the seats were removed, and that day I went to the hospital. I was very upset because I wanted to create this promenade space par excellence, where, again, it brings people from different parts of the city, and it did. But then the owners of the various shops didn't want Eastern Ammanis to come and not spending money. So they pressured the municipality to remove a lot of the public seatings. But still, nevertheless, I think it's a successful project that promotes a different type of public space in the city. This is, again, when it was first inaugurated. One of the projects that I have finished recently, and I'm very proud of, is the adaptive reuse of the electricity hangar in Ras Al Ain. And I welcome you all to come, or when you come to Amman, to really check it out. I think it's a very interesting project. This project is taking this derelict building that has been deserted, which was built in the 1930s, and transforming it into a public space. And building, and this is how it used to look like from the inside. And building a new building next to it, which is Gallery Ras Al Ain. But again, this gallery is not flexing its arms, it's not monumental in scale, but it's like the houses of the Jabal Nadif, which is the mountain behind, are cascading down and meeting the hangar with the plaza. This is the vision for the interior. And this is, for example, the gallery when it was finished. I've used Colestra as a material because I felt it's a material that is used by the elite, old money elite, and there's a big difference between the old money and the new money elite, in their villas, for example, in Shmasani, in Jabal Amman, but it's also used by the middle class on their verandas, on their terraces, on their stairwells. So I felt it's a material that brought Ammanis together. This is at night when it's finished, and this is the hangar from outside. Another project on the city is not entirely physical, but it's a very important project. It's called Hamzat Wasal. Orchestrated and started by Raghda Boutros, and also by many other Ammanis like myself. It's a project that provides opportunities for people from different parts of the city to interact and to meet and to know each other beyond the casual, hello and how are you. It's a very interesting project because, there's a lot that we don't know about each other or about the other. And this project, Hamzat Wasal, provides the opportunity to do that. Another project on the city is this magazine that this anthropologist Ahmed Abu Khalil produces, which is Al-Mastur. It talks about the city from the perspective of the poor. And this is something that is extremely important. Planning from the perspective of the poor, how the city is changing from the perspective of the poor, and so on. Other places in the city, this is the Zero-Scape Garden in between the National Gallery of Fine Arts and Jabal Webde, which was designed by Laraz Ri'at from the CSBE, the Center for the Study of the Built Environment. Again, another public space that is very popular within the city, even though a lot of people don't know about it. Again, the city changes in many ways. The emergence of neighborhood associations. There's one in Ashrafiyya, one in Jabal Amman, one in Jabal Webde, and I'm sure there are others that I don't know of. The one in Jabal Amman had created Jara, which is a flea market in the summer on Fridays. Yes, it might be critiqued of being a bit westernized, a bit upper middle class, but actually it brings different people together. And even the rich of the city, they're part of our society. We're not against the rich, on the contrary. At least this flea market brought them back from their villas and from their European vacations to spend time in the real city. This is another project which I think is very interesting. It's Makan in Jabal Webde, an alternative place for artists that hosts artists from Jordan and also from different parts of the Arab world, and provides an opportunity for alternative art, whether it is urban art or other installations, videos, and so on. So it's a place where there is real self-expression about the city and about social and cultural change in the city. For the first time during the past 20 years, we started acknowledging Amman as a city, which is a city I adore and I love. And I think it's one of the most beautiful cities in the world. But still, it is unexplored, understudied, and so on. Such as En Rencontre Jabal Webde, which was done by the French Culture Center, or much earlier on, edited by Satane Shami, a very dear friend of mine, and Jean Henouillet, Amman, City and Society. You know, when cities like Cairo had Najib Mahfouz talking about them in the 40s and 50s, we had to wait until much later. The first novel that appeared on the city is Abna al-Qal'a by Ziad Qasim, God bless his soul. The reason why I'm mentioning this, even though these are not physical spaces, not all of them at least, but there are very important projects on the city. Abna al-Qal'a, for example, as a novel, talked about Jabal Qal'a in the 1950s in Amman. So, and projects by university students. I teach part-time at the German Jordanian University, and these are samples of my students' projects. This is, for example, how to address forgotten places in the city, like the stairs, public stairs in Jabal Webde, or the derelict cinemas of the city, like Cinema Al-Khayyam, which I consider the most beautiful building in the city. And thank you.